We have some successful digital health founders that you'll hear from today. And I do just want to remind everyone just to take a moment to turn on your cameras. We will stop for questions at one point. We'll have time for questions at the end, but you can also feel free to put any questions in the chat throughout. And with that, I will turn it over to Carlos Reines, who will be moderating the session for us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily, and welcome everyone. Super pumped, super excited for this session. It's going to be interactive, so we'll walk you guys through the structure for today, but the panelists suggested that we do breaks throughout in Wheel for questions, so we'll do that. I think it's a great call. My name is Carlos Reines. Started a company called Rubicon MD about 10 years ago, now part of Oak Street, part of CVS Health. I am class of 2014. I was a Rock Summer Fellow myself as I started the business during first year of business school. So we have an incredible panel, as Emily said, and hoping that you guys learn a lot, get inspired, and I would be delighted if the outcome of this is that more of you are encouraged to start businesses or get insights that help you while building your businesses. I'm going to hand it over to the panelists in a sec, but to walk you guys through the structure, we're going to do 4 sections today after intros. The first one is going to be finding a co-founder, and we'll go through insight from the group and then open up for questions. Second one will be fundraising versus bootstrapping, same structure. Third one would be acquiring your first customers, and then we're going to do a wrap up at the end with what Sandeep suggested as industry veteran lessons, and then final round of questions. So I think we have a very good group. Please chime in, ask questions. This is not the same. Thanks, Jonathan, for adding the company logo.
Everybody's got these beautiful logos, so I needed.
I love it. I love it. So yeah, we'll dive in. Since you're on the spot, why don't you go first, Jonathan?
I'm John Bush. I am one of the co-founders of Zeus, Athena, Who's Your Daddy Health. I was a co-founder, one of the co-founders of Athena Health, who was the child of Zeus. Not that I'm still insecure. And Zeus picks up where I left off at Athena, really at the data layer of the clinical record. So we're interested in creating something that works a little like LinkedIn does for resumes for medical records. So an always on, always current medical record API for every American, so that hopefully a lot of people on this call can be pan provider, pan geography caregivers without being trapped in silos.
Awesome. Thank you. Fun fact, I had Athena and John as a seed stage investor in Rubicon MD back in 2015.
The winner of the first ever Athena Pitchathon, Rubicon MD.
Awesome. Alice, you're next.
Hey everyone, I'm Alice. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Venice Health. I'm HBF class of 2022. I was 2021, but deferred for a semester. Had 2 summers of working on my startup, Venice Health, which is a digital mental health platform currently serving the Asian American community. The problem that we're solving is that current evidence-based interventions in psychotherapy have been developed with less than 7% BIPOC data and less than 0.1% when it comes to our beachhead market. So we've created a unique care model to address the lack of cultural sensitivity and offering it on our digital platform. We recently closed our pre-seed round, led by Kicker Ventures. So I'm fairly fresh in my journey, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Alice. Julian.
Hey, thanks, Carlos. Julian Flannery. I'm the founder and CEO of Sumis. I was class of 2005, HBS, and we founded Sumis really to solve the access problem in specialty care. We use a marketplace model that attracts leading specialists across the country, and then we create different ways for them to engage with members and physicians ultimately with the goal to drive better outcomes through access to high caliber expertise. So we have a terrific employer product. We serve as a clinical front door to high quality specialty care for employers. We also white label our platform for top AMCs to help hospitals scale their own expertise. And then we're kind of dabbling in the world of Carlos and sort of peer-to-peer, a little bit different, but similar. There are some commonalities there. We've raised 70 million since inception, again, founded in 2015, so I've been at this a while. So maybe on the other end of the continuum of Alice. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy. I run Human First, and we believe that there's more to healthcare than not dying. And so we focus on ways to create more access to help people feel alive. And what that means is measuring things that matter to patients. And so we work with 22 of the top 25 pharma companies that are measuring things like sleep, activity, things that you'll measure from sensors and other types of wearable. And it's exciting. There's now with COVID and people thinking about new types of technologies, there's a lot more of this, over 200 clinical trials now. Most of the top pharma companies are all using what's called digital biomarkers. And I discovered a lot of this work because I was a software engineer at Achille, which is one of the first digital therapeutics, and then also at Instacart, and we were doing at-home delivery. And then I served as a entrepreneur in residence in the digital health unit at the FDA. So I'm HBS 2017 and also as part of the Rockefeller group, and excited to be here with you all.
Awesome. And Sandeep?
Sandeep Acharya, founder, CEO of Octave Health. We are focused on making a mental health system that's more equitable, effective, and sustainable. Right now, it is neither of those three things, none of those three things. It's a unique opportunity in this space. We focus on partnering with insurance companies to get therapists higher wages to participate in the insurance system, but in exchange for delivering on outcomes. And so we take accountability and risk for actually getting clients better. It's a space that I'm fond of because we have not yet screwed it up like we've screwed up the rest of healthcare service delivery in this country, irreparably damaged. Mental health landscape, not so much. Been doing this for 5 years. We've raised 86 million to date, just closed a $52 million round. So more on the later stage end of the spectrum. And the last thing I'll say is that you all are ahead of the game. I did not identify healthcare as an area of interest. I graduated in 2009, Section J. I did not identify healthcare as an interest for at least 2 years of investing. And then after investing, did not decide to start a company till One Medical, doing it for 5 years, and then not feeling like I could find a boss that I liked as much as I liked. And so, appreciate you all being so ambitious and ahead of the game.
Wonderful. So as you guys can see, we have incredible diversity today in terms of the type of companies, the stage, and the backgrounds of the panelists. So let's start with finding a co-founder. Probably one of the most difficult, definitely the most difficult, most critical hire that you can do. There is also the question whether you're going to be a solo founder or have a co-founder. And then, if you have a co-founder, I can tell you from my own experience, they become a life partner, much like your significant other. So I want to start. I would like for everyone to chime in, but I want to start with you, Alice, and the experience of starting with a classmate. I did start with another HBS graduate, but we were in the same class. But I think starting with a classmate is probably very relevant to this audience, and how you guys went about it. How do you determine equity splits? And then Andy, I will love your perspective on having a clinical co-founder, and also how to think about a technical co-founder. You bring that unique technical background that most of us don't have, but how should folks think about bringing technical expertise, whether it's in a co-founder or first hires? But Alice.
Yeah. So I found my co-founder at HBS. It's kind of like one of those dream, HBS stories. You come in, find a co-founder, start a company, raise some money, and keep working on it. My co-founder was my section mate, and we started out as friends. We were the two mental health people in our section, neither of us were looking to be founders, but we had, kept in touch about different things we were exploring since we both shared this passion in mental health. And it wasn't until after our first year summer internship, when we're catching up, that we landed on this problem and decided to start working on it together through the Rock Accelerator program. So some tips I have, I think finding someone who have this shared passion for the problem that you're solving, not necessarily the solution, but the problem can be really helpful, because you're going to face so many hardships along the way, and you want your co-founder to be individually committed to solving the problems, so that they don't just throw in the towel when things get rough. So I think first and foremost, that was a really critical component that we shared. In terms of how we went about it, we assigned roles right away based on our interest. We actually shared a very similar background of healthcare private equity, consulting, investment banking, but she happened to have more interest in the product role. I was more of a generalist, didn't have any specific skill, so I opted to be the generalist side. I also carried a bit more clinical background from my undergrad and training as a certified coach. So we had this split of roles. I think assigning the responsibility is quite important. You're going to work really collaboratively most of the time, but it helps to have that ownership and accountability, as well as you both have agreed on who will be the final decision maker when it comes to a certain work stream up front, such that if you have any disagreement, you will just go with the owner of the work stream. We also talked about our equity split right away. In the beginning, it's hard to really know. So a lot of times it is based on your time commitment, unless one person is bringing in something really significant, like a patent or technical expertise. I think you can split it evenly, but make sure you're kind of thinking in the 4-year cycle, not just in the next year, and then building a vesting schedule into it. And then I don't want to take up the whole airtime, but I think the best way to evaluate whether or not you're a good match is through working on a project together. So something like the Rock Accelerator program is really a great way to suss out that relationship. And as you're working together, some of the questions that have been helpful for me to think through is a mentor told me the 3 questions that you should ask are, do I trust this person? Do I think this person is competent? And do I enjoy working with this person? And unless you can answer yes to all of them, I think it would make a difficult long-term partner. So I'll pause there a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks, Alice. Andy, do you want to chime in?
Sure. I think I think one thing here is people share all their stories, but you're just gonna have to figure out what's true for you. Maybe you want a co-founder, maybe you don't. Maybe you don't want to have somebody else that you have to make decisions with. And I think there's a lot of push, especially at HBS, to have co-founders, and you can use the royal we in a lot of forums and not do that, or do it. I don't think there's a blue book where you have to do it. YC generally says that they should do equal equity splits. There are so many companies that I know that imploded because they did equal equity splits, and you didn't just decide who was the final decision maker on a number of areas. And then if you don't have equal equity splits, there's often resentment. You kind of just have to pick which version of the problem you want to sign up for, and what relationships you have with your different teams. So I made the decision for us that I wanted a co-founder. I also wanted somebody who had a clinical background, and it turns out for us that she really loved treating patients. And so it was kind of perfect. We got to do some of the early accelerators. We applied for NSF grants together. We did not raise venture. I'm not a huge raise venture right as soon as you have an idea. I'm a raise venture once you kind of know your idea is working, because for a lot of reasons we can talk about that. But she now has more advisor equity, and she's pumped because it's been fun for her to stay involved. And it was great for us in the early days of how we were doing it. So I'm happy to answer any other questions on that.
So I think there's like one good point there. You can have a co-founder who is intentional about not being engaged in the long term and
Oh,
still
totally. Like
co-founder.
tons. Like there's so many companies, biotech companies, where you have like an academic co-founder. Just be super careful with the academic co-founders though, because if your company takes off, the school will try to take part of the company. There's like, you have to be really careful with your CIAAs and how that's set up and like who has the IP, especially if you're doing that. If anyone's doing the Revolutionary Ventures cross course with MIT, they do a really good job on like tech transfer. But yeah, and people will tell you things all the time, like you can't do co-CEOs. Like that worked for Warby, didn't work for a ton of other people, but like whatever you want to do, you can figure out how to do it. Like Flatiron did a bunch of things like that too. I think the biggest part of starting something is asking around, trying to make your cap table not look like too sketchy that nobody wants to work with it, but also just deciding which version of the startup you want to do and then going from there. And you're going to mess up and you just have to figure out like what kind of things you're learning. I don't know, what do other people say or think about this area?
I think the one thing I haven't heard yet is complementarity. So there is something to be said for your kryptonite being their superpower and vice versa. My original co-founder just had an obscene attention span and knew no one. I had the attention span of a flea and knew, the entire food chain that we would need to start the business, as an example. This time around, I had an ambitious technical project. The scale challenges, the data aggregation and harmonization challenges were not yet cracked by anybody, and many had tried. So I just needed an incredibly strong technical co-founder. In my case, co-founders. But all of them have various slices of an incredibly deep sense of how to do hard technical projects in healthcare. So I would say that's the only thing I hadn't heard yet that I think is worth throwing into the mix. In terms of scale of the equity, I guess I probably should mention, like, if you both start with nothing, then splitting it seems fine. If one person is bringing all the valuation and the other isn't, maybe the guy who brings all the valuation, gets a little more, he said defensively. But that's another thing, is just, what would the business be valued at if co-founder A started it? What would it be valued at co-founder B? Okay, so that's and it's a guess, but hopefully if you're co-founders, you're able to talk about difficult things easily, or at least easily-ish.
Yeah, I would just second that. Jonathan, I thought about it the same way, sort of complementary. I understood the clinical side, but I needed somebody with a deep network on the physician side who brought the biggest names in sort of physician land to what we were doing. And then I was not a technical founder, but I was fortunate enough to have a network where I had a good friend who's a terrific CTO, and I equitized him in a way that he was a non-operating advisor, but man, was he incented to help. And so he got me my first head of engineering. My co-founder got me a board of incredible physicians, but both of them were non-operating partners. So something that Andy said, which was super mature, is just, you got to really know thyself. I have a high degree of enterprise control. Like I love the idea that I'm controlling my company. I have complementary pieces in my ecosystem, some of whom I've missed on, by the way. Sometimes you'll equitize an advisor and they're just a waste of space. So that would be my other piece of advice, which is, be very careful about, sort of how you build the ecosystem around you. Don't be afraid to go at it alone. It is a little lonely though. You have to have some people that you can talk to. The benefit of co-founders, you're in the same room every single day, kind of really hashing it out. Whereas I sort of stared at my navel a lot in the early days and tried to figure it out. So just different, as Andy said, sort of different gradations of, different choices, but you really have to know yourself.
I think the nice thing about a co-founder, it can be accomplished in other ways, but it's very valuable to have someone who knows you well and doesn't fear you, and can step to you no matter what. Because if things do go well, hubris, Trumpism in smaller flavors are diseases that every human catches, and having someone who can bring you down to size, a great CFO who, is older and wiser could maybe do the same thing and you pay absurdly for what they do, but it's because of that. But a co-founder has a superpower in that regard that I think is valuable when things work.
Yeah. Julian, I wanted to ask you a quick follow-up there. As you mentioned, your first technical hire, especially for folks who are first-time founders and don't have necessarily the ability to raise a lot of capital, right out of the gate. How any tips around your first, if not co-founder, your first technical hire, and how to think about them being the hackers who can put things together real quick versus the person who will scale and go into managing a technical org and building for scale, and especially when things like security, HIPAA compliance, high trust, whatever the certification is, are so critical in health tech.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because I was not a technical co-founder or technical founder. I mean, let's just be clear. And there's a guy he was head of engineering at Capital IQ. He's been a CTO a couple times. Just a close friend who really taught me what I needed, right? And so I just asked a bunch of questions about what does this person look like. And I chose, rather than a very tenured CTO or seasoned CTO, I chose a 26-year-old who was his best engineer. And he said he's going to be the best engineer you'll have. And, he joined us, and he, if you guys have read Carol Dweck, kind of learning mindset versus fixed mindset, this guy has the ultimate learning mindset. He's got an engineer's brain. Healthcare is complicated. To your point, Carlos, you got to think about privacy and HIPAA compliance and GDPR and all these kind of things. SOC 2, all the things. And what I was so impressed with is that he just continued to learn and learn and learn. And, he's our head of engineering now. He's, in his early 30s. He's built a team of 15 people who respect the hell out of him. He's a great teacher. And I love that. I love the idea of taking somebody and kind of allowing them to grow. So, I think it goes into the financing side of this. I didn't take $20 million and have the venture pressure to have like a milestone within 12 months. We grew the company at a pace where somebody like that could keep pace and really kind of ascend into that role. So again, it's that's one way to do it. I don't know if it's the right way. It's worked out for me. So
just three quick thoughts on that one. So one is, it's never too late to be an engineer. Like, I know some people might be like, oh, I'm too old for that. Like, a lot of the technologies are changing quite a lot. And between your first and second year, you can do a 3-month boot camp and like learn a lot of how the technologies come together. And then I think I did that before school, but it was very helpful to like understand parts of it. And then I worked as a software engineer for a little while, so I could kind of like hack my way around. Second is, I really think if you're just starting, building things that don't scale is important. If you take money too early and you don't actually know if the product works, like you can probably build a lot in Shopify or build a lot in like something that's like kind of hacked together and not actually use repeatable code unless you like need to do that. So I would do that until you have a business idea. And then for many people, the very first thing when you're building your production environment, your main engineer will never do this again. Like, you're going to set up what's called like a CI/CD system. You're going to figure out like whether or not you're using AWS or something else. You're going to do configuring of like all sorts of Cloudflare stuff. There's like all this setup that no one generally ever does. Like, if you hire a really great engineer, they do this like one time and never again. And so when you're in that phase, like, you probably want to find a good friend of yours that you trust, or somebody's friend, and like they set up all of those systems the first time well, and then you'll like decide what, language you want to be building in and something like that. And if you expect your first engineer to like set up the first production environment, one, they're probably going to do it badly than somebody else. So I think it's really important to like think about the like exactly what you're building. And then there's entirely separate compliance people that you should not put on your engineering team to like set up, whatever SOPs and requirements that you're going to have. And most of the compliance stuff is actually non-technical business requirements around that, and just making sure that you're asking the right person to do the right thing and not finding the 26-year-old who is going to be great, but ask them to do like an entire setup on everything that they have never like experienced before, because it's like asking a fish to climb a ladder when like they would actually have been really, really good at, setting something up once it's been in a production setup.
Great.
They do have fish ladders in Maine.
They do. You have to go to Zeus to figure that one out.
We do have fish ladders.
Any questions from anyone before we wrap up this section, or any of you who wants to share their experience if you're starting something or going through this, either a co-founder or early hires right now? All right, we'll move to the next one, but I'll be disappointed if no one's asking questions in the next one. You have to be brave. Okay. All right. Second topic here is fundraising versus bootstrapping. I think it's pretty clear that over the last few years, there's been this overinflation, overhype. At some point, people were just celebrating fundraise, whether that's was correlated to the business doing well or not. And obviously the correction we've seen in the last year and a half. I want to start here with you, Sandeep, just because, just raised 50 million in at least the most difficult time for fundraising I've seen. And I think there's for sure very good learnings there. And then Julian, I think you have something very unique in the sense that you've raised a lot, but you've structured in a very special way that I'm not gonna share until you do. But I'd love to start with the two of you, and then have the others chime in.
Yeah, I would just caveat that I probably think the best outcome you could possibly have is not to raise. So if you can be in Julian's world, but with that said, my life circumstances were such that having exited, one company and, family and the sort of risk aversion, I wanted to make sure that I could progress and learn and move at an appropriate speed. I think the TAM that we were attacking was large enough that I recognized capital was going to be a barrier. Like if we were to bootstrap the business, we wouldn't be able to keep up with the larger, better funded folks, and product market fit and achieving things and moving quickly requires a certain level of scale. And it's really that, like, I think it's the capital strategy needs to come from the opportunity you're attacking. And you need to have a real view on what the opportunity that you're attacking is and the scale of it. Don't raise capital unless you have to. And I traditionally don't raise capital until I have a real reason to. A lot of times people raise capital because they're running out of cash and they want to go figure out how to get more money. So they make up a story on the next leg. I think the actual ideal is the reverse. That when you raise capital, you figure out what you're trying to accomplish with that capital, and you work really hard, never forgetting the next milestone as a thing you've got to nail, and really nailing it. And then, proactively communicating with investors what you're trying to accomplish by the next milestone, so that when you come back to them, they know what you were doing. So I think there's a lot here, but in the question of bootstrapping versus raising a ton, I would just really flow from the opportunity. There's no right answer, but generally, that capital does come with controls, and I've been fortunate. I've been able to hire good investors as board members and partners, but not everyone is so fortunate, and so often that can be tricky. So anyway, happy to address specific questions, but obviously I have a lot of thoughts here.
Yeah, and thank you for that perspective. I think in the last 3 months, I've talked to 3 or 4 founders who have raised more than $100 million in the last 5 years. None of them are north of 10 million in ARR. And there's no way to get out of that trap anymore. They're cutting down their workforce, but how do you grow into your valuation? They're probably gonna, walk away with nothing or have to shut down their businesses. And 2 years ago, I was jealous, like, look at these guys. They're like incredible at fundraising. I wish I was like them. And now it's coming back to hit them hard, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, Jerome Powell has been running his leaf blower full of cash into the economy for, a really long time with interest rates at zero. And so you have just lots and lots of dollars on this. Maybe we're growing the number of inventions and the GDP is kind of growing at some number, 2, 3, but the cash available is growing at 10, 20, 30%, printing money. And now that's stopped. So we should remember that of 2020 to 23, that whole COVID, even 19 to 23, was just an orgy of excess cash for all kinds of political reasons that had nothing to do with, like, don't use anything there to inform your strategy about anything. I think, maybe they should have raised $100 million because money was free.
No, actually, so it's funny because this class, I'm sure you're feeling like, oh, we missed the party, right?
It's a shit party.
It was a
Everyone's
bad party.
On coke. They don't remember anything they said.
Everybody's hungover, so it's okay.
Totally.
In 2009, when I graduated, I was like, it's my second recession. I'm so tired of graduating into recession. But what people told me was, this is the best time to graduate because capital is scarce. People have more discipline. Great people are on the sidelines looking for opportunities. This is a great environment. And so don't be deterred by that. And in fact, so our investors shared a stat of like just the amount of money that flowed in digital health, and the ability for that money to earn return is basically zero. And you're not going to be operating in that circumstance. There was a question around TAM. I want to make sure to let Julian get in, but happy to circle back to it after.
Oh yeah, no, it's all really, Jonathan, good points. Sandeep, really, really good points. I guess a couple things. I focus a lot on trust in my employees, trust in my team, trust in my investors. And, when I started the company out, I just went to a few friends and asked them for some money, and I kind of put it to work. It was me and 2 other people. And, we built purposefully and slowly. And, I had a sort of a founding principle, which is I wanted to make money for my investors, and I wanted to create something before I actually, got overextended on capital. I mean, the biggest point that you've heard is what Carlos said, right? There's lots of our friends who've raised, a ton of money at a valuation they're never going to reach, and they're just stuck because of the terms. And, I'm a little bit on the older spectrum, I guess. And I met a lot of VCs, and God bless them on this call, but I felt like I could do it without them. I wasn't super impressed with the questions they were asking me. And so I just stuck with people I knew, a lot of HBS classmates who believed in me, who kind of, put money to work, and it took longer, right? So Sandeep is in mental health, right? You got to scale that, and you got to scale it quick, right? Because, and I know why. And you're not risk averse. You're good for you for taking that. I think it's awesome. But I didn't take, we raised in the last, ignoring this calendar year, we raised 50 million in 12 months. But I built something that was credible, that had a path to profitability, that had, really attractive gross margins, really attractive unit economics. I was able to attract really talented people to it. And so I raised at a decent valuation, and I raised a decent amount, but I still owned a material piece of my company. And the fact that, the data point that Carlos is referencing is that, no VC owns more than 2% of my company. And that's something I'm really proud of. The other thing I'd say is, look, everybody thinks about tech and they think about VC, right? There are lots of different pools of capital out there. There are family offices. There's lots of different, there's high net worth folks who are just really excited to get behind exciting founders. I was fortunate enough to have a classmate when I was raising my Series B Rick Berman, who was, spent his whole time at Notre Dame's endowment. He was the number 2 at Notre Dame, decided to leave and raised a permanent capital structure. And as soon as he started telling me about a permanent capital structure, I was like, wow, this is perfect, right? Because what they do is they have a longer time horizon, believing that if you are investing and every decision is in the best interest of the company, and you're not sort of tied to this 7-year mark, you're actually going to produce a better company, right? So I was very attracted to that. So we raised from a permanent capital structure. I still control my company, and we're moving. There's pros and cons to both approaches. The early stages were hard. They're gritty, a lot of navel gazing and not a lot of money to throw around. But what it does, it's what Sandeep says, and this is the advantage you guys will have, is you'll build companies in a down market, right? And that's where the discipline comes, creating real discipline around spending, every last receipt. I would walk in New York City versus taking the subway or the cabs, right? So just like having that sort of a very sort of frugal mindset in the early days of your company, I think is something to consider. So I don't know, Carlos, is that helpful? It's maybe a little contrarian versus the traditional VC route, but perhaps interesting for the group.
Yeah, I love that frugal version of the first few days. I left HBS driving a U-Haul packed with like free furniture that I took from people who were leaving it behind, and that was my first apartment in New York City. It was like at the ultimate extreme of being frugal, not being able to do much or hang out with my classmates who were all going to dinners and parties, because it was very tough at the beginning. Alice, how has it been raising your first round in this market for you guys?
Challenging, to say the least. I think everyone gave good insights about the market. I wanted to touch on raising as an underrepresented founder, as a first-time founder, as a female founder, as a minority founder. That adds so many more layers of challenges. I think just like tactically leverage your access to resource. As a student right now, there's a ton of VCs in the office hours. For better or for worse, VCs are herd animals, and they all think alike. They're all like looking for the next big thing, trying to not be left behind from the newest trend. I think speaking to them and seeing their feedback to your pitch, and not dismissing their feedback. To be honest, I did dismiss a lot of VC feedback early on. I didn't feel like they really understood what I was doing. They didn't understand the sector, but because they all think alike, you kind of have to also just like know how to counter some of those feedback. And then you can start to ask about what it is that they're really like. What metrics do you need? Start asking about some of the specifics. So I think just seeing VCs as a necessary part of your stakeholder ecosystem is an advice that I would have given myself. I think there is like this narrative in HBS, like, don't over-index on what VCs say because they're not the experts, you're the expert. But at the end of the day, unless you have access to that kind of capital in your own personal network, which I know many of us don't, you still kind of need them at the end of the day. I think for me, something that I had to overcome as a founder is just the inherent like blockers I had about asking for money. And like as a first-time founder raising money from your own network, there was a lot of discomfort. I think a lot of immigrant founders or underrepresented founders feel. So, pay attention to that, and the quicker you can get over some of those intrinsic factors, I think can also serve you well. Yeah, what can I say? I think it's much harder for underrepresented founders to just raise on an idea because we don't, without that track record of being a repeat founder. So work towards showing as much metric or sign of customer attraction or demand that you can just be really, really helpful to back what you're saying and what you're pitching to the VCs. I hope that's helpful.
Super helpful.
We haven't talked about sort of the continuum of business type. So on one end, you've got a service business where it's like, hey, look, I went to HBS. I will come in and run your medical group for you. And I will do it for cheap if you cut me in or if you try my product. And you can bootstrap a customer base and a value prop with no capital. And whatever the job that is, it's not scalable enough to justify capital, but it could get you into a job to do that then would allow you to move a little bit towards, the way other end. There's a platform where you're saying, Ray, I'm going to raise zillions of dollars and have no product, but many products will be better because of mine, which is sort of, you need to have a lot of track record for anybody to give you money for that ludicrous idea, and then it still won't work. And you'll have to come back somewhere towards a job to do, albeit more of a technical one. But when you think about your capital structure, you can also think about your business model and yourself. How long a leap of faith, how many dollar and how many month long leap of faith does someone gonna heart me out for? And if the answer is zero, because I just graduated business school and I don't have a track record, orient the first iteration of the business model towards the service end. And if you've, middle-aged man worried about existential relevance and you could raise a lot of money, try something more towards the platform end.
Jonathan, I'm going to get back to you on that one when we talk about acquiring your first customers and your idea of the host organism. But I want to stay here on fundraising a bit more. Andy, on you want to talk about that? I did the entrepreneurship conference back in the fall, and I did listen to Laura speak about this. I found it super interesting. Do you want to share a bit more on this link you posted here?
Which one? We're trolling each other on this side. Don't listen to any of our advice. Absolutely. This is whatever the wrong thing here is to take the Twitter line and just apply it blindly to your life. Julian's also right. Which one do you want me to, I'm being a troll in the chat. The questions.
Yeah, no, the piece, the article on, female founders getting asked different questions.
Oh yeah. No, it's really fascinating. So there was a really interesting piece. I posted it, and they looked. Well, there's actually two research that this group did, which I thought was really interesting. It's run by, I like naming the. Oh no, this was a different one. Here, I'll just screen share this because this was, I think, so interesting and very striking, and happens. So nobody goes in and is like, oh, I don't want to raise from underrepresented folks. But realistically, women-only teams get 2% of venture funding, 2%. So we happen to be one of those 2%. We've raised very well from great investors. I think there's a ton of things that we can talk about with that. But one of the things that was really striking to me is the different types of questions, and this happens all the time. So generally, men get asked on promotion questions and women get asked on prevention questions. So promotion is how do you want to acquire customers? Retention is more how many daily and monthly active users do you have? Vision is what is the brand vision for this? Or how do you plan to test this? And one of the things that, and this one I got all the time, management, can you tell us about yourself? How much are you doing this in-house? Two examples are very, very funny for me. I was dating somebody for a while who ended up being very, very prominent and very successful in crypto. And at the early days, our companies were somewhat similar in nature. And this is before crypto was anything, truly nothing. And we would talk about things and somebody would be like, how big could Bitcoin be? And then they would go to me and then they're like, isn't this clinical outcome assessment and healthcare really niche? And I was like, literally healthcare in the problems that I'm solving are 20%, a huge percent of GDP. These are not niche problems. You might not know about these problems, but they're not niche. And over time, the other one became something much bigger, and we were both software engineers, and people always ask me how long I've been a software engineer, and nobody ever asked him how long. And I developed a ton of our app and I did happen to build it in-house, and they would just assume that I built it out of house. And he never shipped a line of code, even though, you know, he was one, and was never asked about that. And for me, that was really frustrating because I'd have to like pause, have extra presence around the question. And when you're asked a defensive question, it's really hard to like do the mental jujitsu to like shift it. And so that was something I'd have to kind of like pause, be present with. And we ended up raising from people that I think ended up being much more promotion than prevention focused. But it was like super interesting to me. I remember coming home one time and asking them how many times they'd been asked if they were a software engineer. And they're like, literally nobody ever asked me or questions it. And then asked like how many times they've like what they think about having children. And like, they're like, do you get asked that question? I was like, yeah, I do get asked that question. And it's kind of like all in the small paper cuts. That said, I think there's also benefits on other side. Like, I think sometimes people way overshare things with me because they, you know, are feeling more comfortable, and then that ends up being a different thing. But I think that is something really, really helpful to think through about like the types of questions. And if you're on the flip side, making sure that you are asking promotion questions to any type of founder that is coming in to work with you.
Yeah. I think those barriers exist. I think it's very encouraging to see, you know, both of you overcoming those barriers. I did experience some of that myself, and I was kind of blind to it. As a Spaniard growing up in Spain, I couldn't have fit any better. And then I came to the US and realized that I was also part of the 2%. You know, 2% of capital is raised by Black and Hispanic founders, and my co-founder is Black. And for the first time, I guess I realized that I was Hispanic. But I think there is a way to do it. Like if we were able to get this to a decent outcome when we had no prior experience starting businesses. I knew nothing about US healthcare. I could barely speak English when I got here. So anyone in this call is already like 20 times more prepared than we were. So it's definitely doable. I do want to get to this question here around raising capital from friends and family and the pressure. I really like the perspectives being shared here. My co-founder did it. I didn't do it. I didn't allow any friend or relative to invest. Now they all complain about it, that I never let them invest. But yeah, so you guys are sharing very interesting perspectives here on the motivation. Anybody wants to add to this?
I love Jonathan's point. I seconded it. We were ready. He said it more succinctly than I did. You don't want people who need it to work. You want people that if they put $250,000 in your business, they're okay if they lose it. And it drives you. I mean, it drove me.
Is this being recorded?
It is.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
Okay, that's the first time. I'd like the recording. That's the first time anybody accused me of being succinct, and I want the recording.
Don't make us recant it.
It was the written word, not spoken. So.
Oh, good point. Maybe not.
My best friend still
talking.
harasses me about the fact that I didn't give him an allocation that was larger, but I would so take that. Oh, we had some tough moments in the first 2 years of the company. And for me, family and friends are my refuge. Like I want to be with them and not talking about work. Of course, they're your biggest backers, but just recognize that if you seek to contain the stress that you have of being a founder, it's often nice. For me, I've found it's better to have a separate container.
Yeah, you know your friends too. So they're your friends. You can tell a little bit about their risk tolerance. If they love the idea of losing money and giving a big, oh man, nice try, and laughing about it immediately, then you want them. You don't want them to feel left out. If somebody who's going to wring their hands, you're not doing them any favors. What's next?
Awesome. Any other questions for you guys on fundraising? I guess I'll throw in one last question before we move from fundraising. If it's cheap, like people have been raising at such cheap, like 50x revenue multiples, or not even revenue multiple because they don't have any revenue, just the PowerPoint. Why not take advantage of that and still be very conservative with how you spend it? because that's what will get you in trouble. But why not raise when it's cheap? Not that it is now.
Well, doesn't it depend? I mean, Sandeep, doesn't it depend on the terms? Like, if you're never gonna, if your probability of achieving that in a normal market environment, that valuation is pretty low, you're going to be underwater for the rest of your founder life, right?
No money is cheap.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, when at One Medical, I remember we raised a round that was very well priced for One Medical. Congratulations. And I was overseeing the employer business that was growing really well, but it was based on expectations that were trumped up about what we could do. And it created this environment for the next 2 to 3 years that was chaotic. So, money is a promise. When you take money, you commit on delivering on your promise. So it's cheap or expensive depending on whether or not you can deliver on your promise, and try to make small promises. Money can be really cheap if money could be cheap if it's if it could be 50 times revenue and be really expensive if you're not going to deliver on your promise. It's just you're going to pay the piper later.
Yeah, we all want to make money for investors. I don't think we want to like, oh, it's so cheap, let's get some, and screw those guys. Like, they'll never make any money, but they did it. So that's not a gratifying way to run stuff. Another thing to think about is just the money makeability. So how big a pile is here, and how big a market are you talking about? And so would every single therapist in the world need to be doing every single, anxiety session on your whatever to make that pile generate a 10-time return? Remember, if it's generating a 10-time return, that means that whoever comes in after that, they think there's a 10-time return for them after that in the future from there. So making sure that you shape the business so that there's always a lot of unplowed soil out in front of you when you value and when you exit and when you gain liquidity. It's also important, regardless of whether it's cheap or expensive.
One thing that was fascinating for me to see recently, a friend of mine, a classmate from HBS, was raising a Series A, asked me for our Series A deck. So I pulled it up and I looked at our financial projections. They were such a joke. Like, it was like, we're gonna, lose money this year, and then it's gonna grow, and then like 2 years from now, we're gonna be like making 40 million of EBITDA or whatever. It was like they were a joke. And it's, especially as a first-time founder in healthcare, it's so easy to tell yourself the lie that this is going to grow and scale a lot faster. Our business is particularly B2B, which just takes forever. But it was very humbling to see our own projections in our Series A fundraising deck and how far reality was from what we thought it would be.
But Carlos, that's a really good point, right? Because I mean, not on the sort of rosy projections, but like tying it to your commercial go-to-market, right? So if you're selling to employers or payers in healthcare, you're talking 12, 24 months, right? Before you might have a contract in hand, and that doesn't guarantee you that, So if I close a deal now, or close a deal, let's say I close a deal in August for a jumbo employer, you know what? They're not actually launching until January 2025. So my GAAP revenue number doesn't start for a year and a half, right? So, as you raise in healthcare, if you're in B2B, just you got to think about that sales cycle. I got screwed on it because I stupidly started my company in the consumer space and quickly turned to employer, but I didn't have enough cash for that 12 to 18 month sales cycle. So I had to go back to my investors and dilute myself some more. So I just want to highlight that, Carlos. It's a really important point.
Yeah, and this also connects with the prior topic we discussed around equity. You have to think about the long term. I know standard is 4-year vesting. I don't think it would be unreasonable in healthcare or health tech to even think about longer vesting timelines. All right, let's on that topic, Julian, got us start in the direction of the commercial strategy. We have a co-founder. We've decided whether we fundraise or bootstrap. how do we go about finding our first customers? Then, John, I told you I would get back to you and this idea of the services. Do you want to share more with the group and how to go about it?
Oh, is there more to it? I thought that was it. Yeah, that there are business models. Some are capital efficient that are more just basically labor based, right? Like you're a consultant. You can go into consulting. I had a guy who I really respect and think of as a sort of brilliant businessman come and show me his plan to raise money for his consulting business. What are you, crazy? That's nuts. Just do it. You know, take a home mortgage loan for a minute or something. You're a well-known guy in the industry. Why would you cut people in, and why would you create that tax when there's no giant scale engine underneath it? So I think, you know, when you're using other people's money, you need to have a long bake time on your product, and therefore, once baked, a giant sort of margin potential and TAM potential. Otherwise, do it as a service. And there's a continuum there. You can imagine some leverage in your service. A tech guy who does management reporting well, or gives you a little digital front end quickly, et cetera. Athena Health was a practice management contract with 7 docs and 30 midwives at a birth center in San Diego. That is how we raised money, angel money, contingent on turning it into an annuity profit sharing relationship. So their money didn't come in until our consulting relationship turned into this annuity. So we were unproven, but the customer didn't have to worry about some of that execution risk. And the way we got in there to earn the right to buy this practice was just consulting, just helping. There weren't a lot of 6 docs OBGYN groups with 3 HBS graduates, you know, doing the marketing.
Agreed. Sandeep, thank you for the comment here. I was actually going to go to you to talk about how you leverage your background in this space to start the business and decide on your commercial strategy.
You know, I was fortunate in that One Medical was coming of maturity, that we started to get to talk to plans and systems across the country, and so developed a little bit of a network. Frankly, we started off as a cash pay business. We were a cash pay business for like 8 months, maybe 4 months before I realized that we needed to work with insurance plans. And the biggest thing that helped me was that I could get into the senior levels of the right plans and have a conversation very quickly. So, you know, don't sleep on having industry experience in a network or finding one through advisors. You know, this was going to be my parting advice. Everyone really focuses on the consumer, but it's really these 5 folks that you have to enrich as a business in one way, shape, or form. And if you're not doing something that's top of mind for them, like I started maybe a decade prior, maybe 5 years prior, I wanted to start a business in end-stage renal failure to improve health outcomes for people by driving people to home hemodialysis. And I walked it around to commercial payers, and it wasn't a top 5 issue for them. And so they just didn't have the bandwidth or capacity to execute. So the businesses that really scale are dealing with a top 3 issue for these 5 constituents. And if you're not, then prepare for a longer road. Sorry, that's maybe that didn't quite answer your question, but it was what I wanted to say.
But that was good. Maybe a push there. You said actually, and on end stage renal disease, that wasn't a priority for commercial payers, but we see a number of companies that are building that business for MA payers or fully capitated provider groups, and they've raised a lot in the last few years, right? The Strive, Somaticis, Cricket, Monogram, like you name it.
I talked to Arvind at Cricket when they were early in their journey, and I'd share with all of my findings, right? Though it's a passion-driven business that took a long time to scale in a market that was very, very strong to invest in capital in all kinds of different places. And we'll see whether there's returns being earned. Like the fact that they raised money in the last 10 years is not necessarily a signal. Let's look for outcomes. And when they get there, I think And I think ultimately the way Cricket found its route to glory was they found the people that were most affected. Commercial payers are not as impacted by the ESRD as Medicare players that are fully at risk. And I forgot where they ended up landing, but they had to shift over time into a value-based care model that drove dollars to the plan. So they figured out a way to kind of, in the beginning, they were doing some patient education stuff that didn't necessarily have the direct linkage, but they found scale. As I recall, that Oak round they did was driven by being able to drive ROI to plants. So it only furthers the point.
Yeah, I think there's like this concept of like people think about just healthcare as a massive market, but there is a lot of segmentation and specialization. Our business looks so different when we're dealing with MA, commercial or Medicaid, or even correctional healthcare providers. So I think that's thankfully these are all massive markets themselves, but yes, that's an interesting point that you have to definitely cater to one of these. That's a really good point. Yeah, I actually I remember I bid all my credits for the one half class on sales. There wasn't even such demand, but like this is the one thing I want to need to get out of here. Had never done sales. Want to talk about that, and maybe also the importance for those of us who don't have the relationship that Sandeep had when he started with all payers and all of that. How do you build your commercial team? I tried to explore with hiring non-healthcare people for sales. That didn't go that well. I'd love to hear from you guys what you've seen.
You want me to start, Carlos, or
Please? Yes, please.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I'll make 2 points. One is in the early days, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I will never forget the day sitting in a WeWork when I 99% probability, I was like, I'm going to close this deal. My whole, my cash profile was predicated off of that deal closing. And guess what? I got the call and they're like, sorry, we're going to punt it until next year. And I will never forget the massive amount of acid that went into my GI tract in that moment and created some stress related. Anyway, no, but I think it's
not how I thought that sentence was going to end.
No, but I think it's a really important skill. Like I think, you talk about experience teaches sales. I totally agree with that. But if you're selling into the payers are a little different, right? You have like an ecosystem that you can kind of count on two hands. Like there's regional payers and then there's kind of national payers and really think that's a long sales cycle. But if you're getting into the employer business, you want to sell to, the middle market or even the jumbos, like, you really need to build a pipe, right? So top of the funnel leads, how do you develop relationships with consultants? You also need to understand that, right? So companies look to consultants to make decisions about their benefits if you're selling a benefit, for example. And so, you really have to build, there's a discipline to sales and a science to sales that I've been really excited to learn over my journey because I was never formally trained in it. And I had a decision to make when I hired my first chief commercial officer. One option was the power player from Mercer or Willis Towers Watson. The other one was a real sales ninja who understood how to build a pipe and really drive analytics. And I hired the latter. And the first year was rough. Year and a half was rough because you do need relationships in healthcare. That's, I'm sure Jonathan could talk about that, but you can't go into healthcare and just sell. You have to have those relationships or hire the people to have the relationships. And then my strategy was kind of put somebody on top of them who was a sales ninja that could really kind of drive pipeline discipline and help us, create a scalable, sales team. So just some thoughts, Carlos, if that's helpful.
Very helpful. We'll go to Jonathan last to talk about industry relationships and doing it the second time. But before that, Andy, I'm curious how someone can get so quickly to 22 or 23 of the top 25 pharmas.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one way is you have a pandemic and you're the only person who knows how to do at-home clinical trials. So, and then you wrote a bunch of papers on it. So I think that was like a lucky piece. We have 8 paying customers of that. So we used like a freemium model where we had a part of our data asset that people could use. We did a bunch of training tools. So people were really scared. They didn't know how to understand the regulatory environment. I had previously served at the FDA. So we had these training modules of like, how would you use these, put those out. And then we use that as lead gen to start building out our relationships in that form.
Very interesting. Still hard to manage through all that noise in the middle of the pandemic. Congrats to you guys.
Yeah, I think one of the trickier things too, especially if you end up choosing pharma as a partner, is they will spend a lot of money on things that might be applicable to one clinical trial, but not replicate to the other ones. So, and they have like very, very large budgets. And so for kind of understanding if you are like kind of stuck in one part of a pharma company, or if you're part of a bigger platform. So in the early days, we're like, oh my gosh, we're like signing these huge deals. We're hitting some like pretty big markers. But then the pharma teams would like do a bunch of kind of like reorgs, and then we would lose our team and we'd have to like resell. And so this is something that's pretty common if you talk to groups like Flatiron and Komodo, of like whether or not you're selling like trial by trial or doing more of like an enterprise play, and making sure that you're like developing enough senior relationships and not just the tactical relationships that are using your product over time.
Great. John, how much easier is it to do it when you've done it before?
It's so hard. It's so hard because you could have really dumb ideas that your friends would scrub out, and instead they're like, oh my God, I never thought that would work. I guess it might work. And like, really, it might work. Oh shit, maybe it works. And you get, it's easy to raise money, but then you have too much money, and it's easy to go too big. It's easy to, and it's hard to work. It's hard to do like detailed work. I mean, if you grow running a business, you're dealing more and more and more with governance and process and people, and less and less with product. And then all of a sudden, if you're trying to invent something, it's about product. But it sure is fun. And the fact that you get a crack at, you get a free break or two if you use it wisely, like anything. I mean, there's benefit to experience on any front. Your second kid is way easier than your third, and your seventh is super easy.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Any questions from you guys before we wrap up with industry veteran lessons? Any last thoughts here on commercial strategy, go to market? No one's gonna speak up. Such a quiet group today.
I have a question. This is Kristen.
Thank
My
you, Kristen.
question for the group is around like when you all were first starting out and kind of those first initial customer interviews, for some of the topics where it's like, healthcare can be kind of sensitive information. So how did you balance kind of getting what you needed from people in terms of sensitive information, and also, getting like a broad reach of people that you kind of like spoke to in the beginning?
I'll fill the air while someone has a better answer. For me, the sensitive information was captured by the fact that we were running a medical group that had its own envelope. So we were inside that envelope, so we had no greater risk. In terms of getting out there, I actually expected to fail activity-based costing because I told Professor Kaplan that I would be skipping his exam to go to a convention of gynecologists in Vegas. And he said, honestly, I've been teaching for 40 years and I never heard that excuse. That's novel. And he let me take my test at his house, which was amazing, and take a taxi to the airport right afterwards. But going to conventions and lurking is really valuable. Go to the panel sessions, listen to the people, follow them around, and happen to run into them at the cocktail hour. It's amazing how forthcoming people are, especially, the ilk on this Zoom, super enterpriser club, HBS, fancy rock, whatever we are. they're dying to talk. If they're established in their industry and grinding away for a while, they're dying to talk to people like you. If you get them in that venue, if you try to call them at their office, it's a little harder. Okay, now you guys have to go. That was my stall.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit, if you're too much on like tech Twitter, they're like, don't go to conferences, don't speak at conferences, it's distracting. But really, like, people do go to conferences and a lot happens there. And if you can get yourself on stage, one thing that I found is, like, a lot of people are really hungry to learn more things. And this is being recorded, so I have to be careful with this. But I think also a lot of people are afraid to like sound dumb or say anything or ask certain types of questions. So when you're in a lot of healthcare settings, especially if there's a new thing that's coming up, sometimes people just don't ask the question that's like around the edges. And if you ask it, they're like, oh, maybe she knows something. And one of the ways that we got a lot of people to share relatively sensitive information with us is we just started writing blogs, peer review papers, publishing, and then it created a beacon for people to say, oh, there's something here. Let me kind of like tell you what's happening. Can you help me figure this out? And the two of you are unfolding this ball together, where like you hold part of the key and they hold part of the key, and you're just kind of like unfolding it. And then obviously you maintain confidentiality with that, but it's that's one path in. And I also find that a lot of HBS people are afraid to publish and to like maybe afraid to tweet, afraid to publish something online for the same reason. Like I one of our first blog posts that went super viral, my co-founder was like, nobody's looked at this before. And I was like, I know nothing about what I'm doing. And she's like, no one ever knows anything. Just put it online and start pulling the thread. And that thread pulled another thread, got me into the FDA. We have 21 peer review papers, and I don't even have a PhD. But I do know, it's not that I don't know anything. I now know a lot about digital biomarkers because they were unfolding in front of me as other parts were unfolding. And so I think finding your collaborators and making opportunities for them, and they'll make opportunities for you, you get to work on interesting problems.
I think when I started the company, we had 20 customer interviews. And the reason I struggle with your question, Kristen, is that nobody ever really expressed a concern. In fact, like in the years since starting the company, saying that I'm a mental health entrepreneur, people have just opened up in ways that I didn't expect. I've heard stories of schizophrenia, suicide, substance abuse, and really personal stories shared. And for what it's worth, like, I feel privileged that people open themselves up to me. And I just try to be respectful and fully attentive when people do. And you'd be surprised how open people can be. So yeah, don't be self-conscious about what is being shared, because you have good intent.
I would echo that. I think in my experience, talking about the why I'm starting this business and why it's personal to me, and it actually took a while. It took a number of years for me to get comfortable sharing my story. I decided to start this business because I had an accident when I was a kid, and doctors messed up, and I lost vision in one eye, and but developing the story, being comfortable telling it, really helps other people open up. Also, Kristen, you guys are in school, at conferences or wherever you go, people don't want to talk to people who want to sell them stuff, but talking to a student, most people want to do that. We leveraged it a ton. So I use my HBS student cards to, I'm doing this project for school. It ended up being a business, but it actually helped a lot.
Thank you all.
Awesome. All right. We have about 10 more minutes. And I want to make sure we go around and let everyone talk about their biggest lesson or industry veteran experience that they want to share with you guys. Cindy, you went first, and you already posted here. Anything you want to add?
I'm sorry, on the industry veteran?
Yeah.
Oh, just two things. One is, a lot of times people think about technology, but they don't think about the underlying workflow. If you don't solve the workflow, there is no technology. And one of the fastest routes to venture death is trying to use technology to solve a problem that no one has. So oftentimes people start off thinking they're in the tech business, but end up in the service business because they didn't really solve the problem that people actually have, not the problem that people want. Second thing is when I wanted to get into healthcare, I wanted to eventually write a book that no one was going to read called How to Fix Healthcare. If I'd have written it in 2013, I probably would have looked like Mitt Romney. Incremental change with market being the route to glory. If I were to write it today, I'd probably be more like Bernie Sanders. We need system transformation. We're all just sort of largely figuring out ways to scale businesses that largely are operating within oligopolies that are competing, and it's tough. So anyway, hopefully you all in the industry will support system change and won't be part of the problem in 10 or 20 years.
It's shocking how slow things move. When I was in school, I took Reggie Herslinger's class, and she was talking about value-based care and how imminent it was. And I was like, great timing for our business. 10 years later, I think it's maybe grown like 1%. Thank you for sharing that. Alice, you're next.
So my biggest lesson, I think really taking an iterative approach to everything has helped me tremendously. Unless you come from a background in entrepreneurship or tech, a lot of times we're used to creating outputs that are really high in quality, but perfectionism is like your worst enemy in entrepreneurship. It's much better to get something out there, get feedback, and iterate on that in every aspect that you're doing than to like wait till you have the perfect idea or the perfect solution. And then going back to the co-founder topic, I think co-founder really matters. I'm deeply grateful that I have a co-founder, even in just like the past year working on this full time. I can't imagine not having a co-founder. So make sure you invest in that relationship, that you guys are able to communicate, because they're your biggest ally, and it's kind of you against the world for them, for the early founders in the early stages. And then you build a team on top of that. But yeah.
Thank you, Alice. John?
Well, setting out on noble missions with people you love is the most satisfying thing I've figured out how to do. And healthcare is convenient in that there's a lot of noble mission out there. Sandeep's frustrations notwithstanding. In fact, even more so. The demand curve doesn't work. You would think by now, you build a cheaper product and then everyone will go to that. But no, if a hospital lowers their prices, they get no new market share. If they raise their prices, they lose no market share. As One Medical finally had to figure out and go, we'll just take payments from the hospital, raise the price, but do very well. But there is, people are great and the world is great. And there's just possibility everywhere in healthcare to trick the system to work. And it's just endlessly filled. And that romance, I think, regardless of the scale or size or impact or success or failure, is just, for me, just endlessly inspirational.
Thank you for sharing that. Andy?
I'll riff off that. I think I love that noble journeys with people you love. I've been one of the bigger lessons in the last year or two, I've been watching this very old PBS series that Joseph Campbell did with Bill Moyers on the power of myth and the hero's journey. And
Hero's journey.
Things, it's so good. It's 6 episodes, and he stacks up all of these moments across many different religions or societies. And part of your role of creating a new world, which is all of what we're doing, is to think about how do you motivate and attract people to it. And I have become completely obsessed with snakes. Anybody know why snakes are at the beginning of almost every origin story? Adam and Eve, indigenous cultures, you can put it in the chat. This is called waterfall. It's how you engage. All right. 3, 2, 1, type it in. Someone be brave. Nothing? Why are snakes at the beginning of origin stories? Panelists, they shed. Snakes that don't shed their skin die, and they shed their entire bodies and live. And the thing that's so cool about what snakes shed is they shed their skins that were their most important protectors. They're not like shedding some like extraneous thing. It was the thing that they needed and protected them until it suffocated them. And they shed everything, including their eyeballs. And that, I think, is like one of the biggest part of the founder journey, is like these sacred cows or the things that you think you needed, all of a sudden you have to shed that on the journey, hopefully with the people that you love in some form, and then regrow out of it. And I think what is a better way to live a life than to figure out how to do that, and to help your customers do that, and to help the partners that you've decided to live this life with doing that. And I think the thing that motivates me is like, how do we not let people die, but actually let them live? And I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that in a much different way that you can do here.
Lovely.
Very cool. I did not know they shed everything, including their eyeballs. That's very interesting. Jillian, take us home.
Yeah, no, I loved, I think, what everybody said, and Andy is such a smart way to put it. And I was going to say sort of a similar thing, which is all of you are HBS either. Well, you're currently at HBS, right? So like, you're the 1%ers of the business world. But that can make you risk averse. Before I started my company, I had all these sort of fancy logos on my resume. And if I'm honest with myself, there were a lot of moments of fear in the first 2 years where I was building the company out of fear. And I think what Andy said is perfect, right? Which is you have to be comfortable being completely uncomfortable, and completely out there and completely vulnerable. And you have to be okay with that. And then out of that comes this great sort of joyful feeling of building a team of people you trust and are trusting you, and you can create something special. And then just to, sort of underline Jonathan's point, like, I could never build a company that makes a better Twinkie or makes a better, skateboard. Like, healthcare is really great because you're helping improve a system that's saving lives and helping caregivers and families and patients. And let's not forget physicians. The physician, challenges in healthcare are real. So I applaud everybody who's, has or started or starting a company in healthcare. It's a very noble mission, and just, be gritty, be tough, and be vulnerable, get after it.
Wow.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up here because we've taken an hour and a half, and I want to make sure I give people at least a few minutes to transition to whatever you have next, probably another call back to back. But I wanted to thank you, all of you, for your openness, for sharing those insights. Guys, if this didn't inspire you, nothing will do. I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of fun. I encourage you guys to reach out to anyone here. You have questions, you're building a business, you want to maybe join the incredible businesses these guys are building, don't be shy and reach out. But thanks everyone for the time today, and looking forward to many more of these together.